job. I currently manage a drug-free communities coalition, but I have a long history of doing public health and substance abuse prevention work. So we're happy to kind of give you an update on the Connecticut's marijuana law. And this is my colleague, John.
Hi, everyone. Actually, it's nice to be back with the Durham Middlefield Local Wellness Council. I've worked with you on a number of occasions in the past, including grant writing opportunities for drug-free communities and other things. I've been a prevention person longer than I want to admit right now. It's been quite a long time. It's been but it's been a lot of fun. And I'm very involved with Connecticut SAM, the Smart Approaches to Marijuana chapter. Both Melissa and I have been working with them and been involved in this marijuana situation, battle, fight, whatever, since its beginning, right? So I am going to share my screen and get started. And here we go. So the new marijuana, Connecticut's law, and you. So just to kind of as a brief review to just kind of get us started. So the cannabis plant, right? It's made up of a lot of chemical compounds that are cannabinoids, right? And two of them, THC, which is of course the psychoactive component of marijuana, and CBD, which does not produce any euphoric effects, but seems to have most of the medical benefits, are two of those, and of course the two that have become household names. Now hemp, which is a type of cannabis, but it only contains very small amounts of THC, but it also contains CBD, and in 2018 the US Farm Bill allowed the sale of hemp and hemp products as long as they didn't contain hardly any THC. And this is where we had that explosion of all those CBD products that became, all over the markets, all over everywhere, all in the convenience stores everywhere, with of course, all of these health claims or benefit claims, which almost all of them, not all of them, but most of them have no basis in science, or at least as of yet. Doesn't mean maybe some of them aren't true, but we just don't know, don't have the science to back that up. It's also important as we talk about marijuana to be really clear that we're not talking about joints anymore, right? What we're talking about is things like gummies, sodas, lollipops, and these knockoff products modeled after these things that have been on our shelves and store shelves for decades sometimes. And also vaping products, all kinds of vaping devices. This is really important because and I haven't seen Durham Middlefield's local student survey data, but in most communities, vaping is the preferred method of ingestion for youth for cannabis, for THC, right? So kids are vaping THC more than anything else, at least in many Connecticut communities. And this will be really come important when Melissa's talking about the law. We'll talk about this more. But then again, more of these knockoff products like, ice cream bars that look like Klondike bars, right? Instead of Jolly Ranchers, Herbal Eats, cupcakes, again, cookies, gummies, all kinds of things. These are in stores all over, these other states that are already legal. Juices, sodas, chocolate bars, dried fruits, energy bars. Oh, Easter candy, right? We just had Easter. Wouldn't it be nice to have a THC Easter candy? Yes. Who's that geared towards? I don't think it's geared towards me. And then, of course, these marijuana concentrates. There are several marijuana concentrates, but this slide is devoted to what they call shatter, what we call shatter. As you can see, it's very brittle. It's almost see-through. It's created through a butane extraction process in a lab-like setting. And as you can see on that right-hand graphic, it's often usually put in pipes and smoked, or it can go into vape devices as well. This product, as well as many of the other marijuana concentrates, can really be up to 99% THC. So these are very, very strong products. This is not like, you know, the marijuana we knew back when we were kids. Here's the picture of a storefront in a legal state where they're selling, right? You can see all these kind of products that we've been talking about, you know, up in the right hand, you know, mushrooms, right? You know, and over on the left hand side, or up in the right hand side, that was the upper left hand side, excuse me. And up on the right hand side, you can see the marijuana infused alcohol products. This is something that's also coming to Connecticut. Marijuana THC infused alcohol products. Yeah. This is an interesting slide because if you look at this box up at the top, right, you can see that when we talk about the THC concentration or THC potency, which is going to be really important issue as we talk about this, you know, during the 1960s through the 80s, the average potency was between 1% and 4% THC, maybe as high as 6 or 7 in some cases, right? But today's marijuana plants up to 40% THC, and I'm thinking that's starting to be low. I'm hearing some things that's actually starting to be a little bit low. And the concentrates up to 99% THC. What's really important when we talk about potency is that when researchers are considering, you know, the effects of marijuana on like the adolescent developing brain, for example, they consider anything over 10% THC to be high potency. And if you look at these 4 states that have legal cannabis markets, right, you can see anywhere from 94.5% to up to 97% of all the products are high potency products. And this is what's coming. This is what's coming to Connecticut. So it's really important for us to understand these potency issues. And Melissa will talk a little bit about this when she talks about the law. I'll also mention now is that after this presentation, I will be sharing this presentation with Dina, who can then email it out to all of you. So you don't need to take notes. And you can see many of these slides, especially when I talk about harms later in the presentation, have citations, research citations, so that you don't have to take my word for it or our word for it. You can go and do the research yourself if you'd like. But at this point in time, I will turn the presentation over to Melissa, who's going to talk about the law.
So I get to talk about this law. The law is officially SB 1201, which the formal name is an act concerning responsible and equitable regulation of adult use cannabis, or RERACA. It was signed by Governor Lamont almost a year ago, June 22nd, 2021. The law is 303 pages with 173 subsections. So I'm not going to cover all of it, and a few disclaimers. I'm not an attorney. So what I've had to do is kind of work my way through this law and try to figure out what it means for us in our communities. I will tell you, if you want to dive in, Control F is your best friend, because that's the only way to find what you're looking for in this law. But I'm going to go over some of the highlights that really pertain to the prevention field. There's a whole social equity piece of this, and lots of pages about social equity in those businesses. And I'm not going to spend really a lot of time on that. I want to focus on kind of what affects our communities and our young people. So what's allowed? So the legal possession and consumption of marijuana is legal for anyone 21 years and older as of last July. So you can now possess it and use it. And there's some restrictions on how much you can have on your person. So adults 21 and older can possess up to 1.5 ounces of marijuana in public and up to 5 ounces in either a locked container in your car or at home. Now, I wasn't aware of this, and I've been doing prevention for a really long time. So I looked it up, and an ounce of plant matter, cannabis, depending on how big you roll your joints, equals about 75 joints. So the law basically allows people to walk around with like 115 joints worth of marijuana on their person. And the law does define, because remember, one of the challenges of marijuana is it's so different. It can come in so many forms, as John said. So we can talk about smokable marijuana. We can talk about edible marijuana. We can talk about, it's coming in different forms. It's coming in different usages. So some of the rules in the law just pertain to smokable marijuana, and others pertain to edible. So the law does define 1 ounce of plant matter is the same thing as 5 grams of concentrate, which is equal to any other product with less than 500 milligrams of THC. So that's how they are defining it. The law also allows cannabis in plant matter and concentrates, like John was talking about, which they define as extracts, oils, tinctures, shatters, and waxes, and allows infused food and beverage. So a lot of the things John was just showing you pictures of. The use is prohibited. So smoking marijuana is prohibited in any place where smoking cigarettes is not allowed. Additionally, all marijuana use is banned in state parks and beaches. The law does say use is prohibited in vehicles, but that gets kind of tricky. And I'm going to talk about that in a minute when we get to enforcement. Retail sales could have begun in the law, could have begun as early as May 2022. But we all know that's not happening, right? It hasn't happened yet. They're still wrangling with that piece of it. And right now they're saying late summer, fall. And I read something today that said kind of by the end of 2022, we're expecting retail sales to begin in Connecticut. Those people who have retail operations will have to ensure customer age. They'll have to card the customers. Delivery is specifically allowed all over the state. You cannot restrict. No town can stop a marijuana delivery business from delivering into your town. We were one of the first, and you know, it was a good first step, but we were one of the first states to put a THC cap on marijuana. So our law says the THC is capped at 30% for plant and 60% for concentrate. So we've got a cap, which is, you know, is a plus. But as John was just talking about, you know, researchers consider anything over 10% to be high potency. So our caps are still pretty high. And probably what was most concerning to many of us is that the law specifically excludes pre-filled vape cartridges from any caps. And for those of you who work with kids or work in schools, you know, we're confiscating vapes from kids with potency levels north of 90%, 93%, 95%, 96%. And John's going to talk about, you know, some of the dangers of potency when we talk about the harms of marijuana. But so for many of us, the fact that this was specifically excluded in Connecticut's law is a real area of concern. Edibles are limited to 5 milligrams of THC per serving. It says that servings need to be individually demarked. So you know, the challenge of edible marijuana is that it takes much longer to enter your system and it takes much longer for you to feel the effects. So if you smoke marijuana, you'll feel the effects in about 15 minutes. If you eat it, it can take almost 2 hours for some people. It can take anywhere from like an hour to 2 hours for people to feel the effects. And so what tends to happen is people use it, nothing happens, right? Like nothing happens for a while. And then they think, well, I paid a lot of money for this, I'm going to eat more. And then they eat more, then nothing still happens. So there's just an ease of overeating and imbibing the product. The challenge too is a marijuana cookie will be maybe 6 servings. Anyone here ever eat a 1/6 of a cookie? Not me, not me. So they're going to have it be demarked. Now what's interesting, I went and did some Google searching the other day because I was trying to find a picture of a marijuana edible that showed the demarking. There's no such thing in any state that I've seen. So obviously companies will need to be preparing some sort of special cannabis products for our market. And I'll be curious to see what the enforcement looks like on that. The law also said that it prohibits products that appeal to kids. So they are saying we're not going to have those products like John showed you from every other state that has marijuana. So that's the intention. They're also saying it's going to require child-proof packaging. So I'm pretty curious as to how they're going to sell cookies in child-proof packaging. So I can't quite imagine that. And I've not seen that in any other state. So the intent, I guess the point I'm trying to drive home, the intention is great, but we still haven't seen kind of the follow through on this. The other thing that jumped out at us is that the law only requires an age warning on these products. So the manufacturers are only required to put a warning on there that says this product is not suitable for anyone under 21. There's nothing about the risk of harm to kids or little kids, pets. There's nothing about harm to pregnant women, nothing about don't use this product and drive or operate heavy machinery. So that's another thing that kind of jumped out at us as an area of concern. So those warnings that are required, as we all know, are far less detailed than what we already require on alcohol and cigarettes. Underage possession. Now, this is something many of you who work with kids are going to be concerned about. So if a young person under the age of 18 is caught with up to 5 ounces of marijuana, now remember, an ounce equals 75 joints. So if a young person is found with the equivalent of like 400 joints, the first offense is a written warning and an optional referral to your Youth Services Bureau or your Juvenile Review Board. Now, that raises a lot of concerns because obviously those of you who are working with your YSBs or your JRBs know that this penalty is much less severe than what we require for alcohol, correct? And then the other challenge, of course, is that warnings are not tracked statewide. So a child can get a warning in Durham and a child can get a warning somewhere else, or down by us, they could get a warning in several different towns, and there's no statewide tracking of those warnings. The other thing is, even your second offense is a mandatory YSB or JRB referral. So for those of us who work in JRBs, because I do, you know, there's a stick and a carrot to JRBs, right? It's an alternative to the criminal, you know, to the juvenile criminal justice system, but it's also, if you don't comply, there's always kind of a penalty to that. So this law does not have any real juvenile criminal justice until you have a quantity over 5 ounces or you have a third offense. So we're concerned about the JRBs and the YSBs. We're concerned about how you engage youth and their families in the restorative system. What if they don't comply? There's kind of no stick. And the other challenge, of course, is that if you can arm young people with large quantities of marijuana with little consequence, if you can, you know, put them out in the streets and are into our schools with large quantities of marijuana with no consequences, that it's going to increase the black market availability to our kids, and that you could in fact end up with like an army of young drug dealers, basically. So there's a lot of concern about these. You can see, like, it's funny, if you're over 18 and you're caught with marijuana, one of the first penalty is a signed health statement. So that's a health statement acknowledging all the health risks of marijuana, all the stuff we don't put in the labels, but we ask 18 to 20-year-olds to sign that health statement, and it's a very minor fine. So there's no teeth to this. The other thing is that for those of us who work with like a lot of underage drinking prevention, we all know that there's a Department of Motor Vehicle penalty for if you're caught with alcohol. You can lose your license, you can wait to get your driver's license. The law mentions the same thing for marijuana, but there's no way to trigger that Department of Motor Vehicle offense, because what triggers it is the juvenile justice system. So there's just a lot of contradictions in this. We're very worried about YSBs and JRBs and what this could mean for their workload and their caseload. Social host, similar to Connecticut's alcohol social host law, if a person has control of a dwelling or private property, they should not be permitting any person under 21 to possess cannabis, and they should be making every reasonable effort to prevent such possession. And the penalties are very similar. School policies, hopefully your schools have already addressed this, but effective this past January 1st, 2022, all schools were required to bring their penalties for use, possession, or sale of marijuana in line with their penalties for use, possession, or sale of alcohol. So many schools had like alcohol and tobacco were one penalties, and then marijuana and other drugs were like a separate, stricter penalties. Schools were required to bring that back in line. You can't use a drug test as the only basis for discipline. If your boards of ed participate in the Connecticut Association of Boards of Education, CABE issued a whole bunch of sample policies on this. So hopefully all schools have brought that in line. Homegrown, the law specifically allows homegrown. There was a lot of debate before the law was passed, but anyone 21 or older will be allowed to grow up to 3 mature and 3 immature marijuana plants starting next July 2023. And a household can't have any more than 12 plants at one time. Although medical marijuana clients over the age 18 and older are allowed to home grow as of this past October 2021. Now, and I need to be clear about this because this was also something I learned. In my brain, I think when I was thinking marijuana plants, I was thinking tomato plants, you know, kind of these small plants that you would have in your back deck. But when you talk about marijuana plants, you know, these have been, you know, aggressively bred to be bigger. And we talk more about canopy when we talk about marijuana. They're more like trees. So like that picture up there on the left is kind of a good example. So you could have someone growing significant quantities of marijuana outside of the regulatory system, outside of the taxation system on their private property. So, and that would be perfectly legal under Connecticut's new law.
My son in Colorado walked into the backyard of a friend and they had marijuana plants that were in pots, big pots, but they are about 12, 13 feet tall. Yeah. So when Melissa's talking about canopy, she's that's right. Yeah. So that's, I mean, if you think of the difference between the amount of marijuana in a plant like that versus a 3-foot plant, a tomato plant, that's very, very big difference.
The other challenge, and John will touch on this later, but like they take a lot of water, they take a lot of pesticides because pests like marijuana plants. I know that's crazy, huh? But you know, they can be very disruptive to like the ecosystem of a neighborhood. If you suddenly got a neighbor who's growing trees, you know, marijuana trees in their backyard as well. Cannabis and driving. So this is a big issue. And I don't know if we have any law enforcement at the coalition meeting, but the law says that DUI, you know, driving under the influence is prohibited, but the police face pretty strict limitations on when they can pull drivers over. So there's a couple of things that are at play here. So the Connecticut's police accountability law that passed last year really puts our law enforcement at personal risk. They can be sued personally if they pull someone over without justification. And then the fact is that our new cannabis law says that even though you can't smoke and drive, seeing someone smoking and driving, it cannot be the sole reason you pull someone over. So unlike alcohol, where I can't drive and drink a beer, you know, they would be able to pull me over right for that act. With the cannabis law, they have to see you doing something else in addition to smoking a joint while you're driving. So that really it's probably a pretty significant disincentive to our law enforcement to really pull anyone over. That and the fact that they could potentially be sued. The law, the cannabis law talks a lot about these tools that are available to law enforcement. One is a RIDE, which is Advanced Roadside Impaired Driving Enforcement. I don't know any law enforcement that have been trained in a RIDE. And then the other thing they talk about is drug recognition experts, DRE experts. And I don't know if you have any DRE experts in your two towns, but they're not super common because it's very expensive. It's about a $10,000 training and you have to go to Arizona for 2 weeks. So a lot of our police departments and our law enforcement agencies just haven't had the resources to send their officers off. So, but the law says, well, you know, if you don't have one for yourself, just borrow one from another town. But remember, there's no easy, reliable roadside test for cannabis impairment. There's no breathalyzer. So investigating a driving under the influence of cannabis can be pretty complicated. And with shortages of police departments, staff shortages, and the fact that you might have to borrow one of their highly trained officers for hours means I don't know how practical it is that you're going to see like different departments sharing their drug recognition experts. And the law does not give any funding to police departments at this juncture to train these folks in this. So the reliance on it seems a little misguided. This is one of my favorite parts of the law is the cannabis and advertising. So the law, when it was written, said that it prohibits any advertising of paraphernalia products or services in any way that targets or is designed to appeal to individuals under 21. Advertising can be done on TV, radio, billboards, signs, internets, social media, mobile devices, only if there is reliable evidence that 90% of the audience is 21 and older. And I like this billboard that I put a picture of because I took that picture myself, because that billboard sits at the intersection of Route 8 and I-95 in Bridgeport, which is one of the busiest intersections in southwestern Connecticut. That billboard is perched above the Total Mortgage Arena, where both Sacred Heart and Fairfield View play their sports. It's next to the new Hartford Healthcare Amphitheater. It is the exit that is used for the Bridgeport to Port Jeff Ferry. It's also used by Housatonic Community College and the University of Bridgeport. And you cannot tell me that 90% of the people who see that billboard are over 21. And anyone who has driven up 91 in Hartford or 84 towards Yukon, you've all seen this, right? 20 miles to your nearest cannabis place. And you can't tell me that these are, and there is no enforcement ability on this part of the law, but we're going to get to some new updates on that. It also says you can't, cannabis businesses can't sponsor an event unless 90% of the people going to the event are over 21. They're not supposed to be advertising within 500 feet of schools or other places where youth congregate. It says cannabis can't be visible from the exterior of the retail establishment. So when we do have businesses, you're not gonna be able to walk by and see the cannabis. And it says that in Connecticut, advertising or logos that are similar to non-cannabis or illegal products will be illegal. So hopefully you won't see those pot tarts and some of these other things where they, are knockoff on legitimate products. So that's what the law says, but enforcement is going to be the big question mark at this point. So how about the money? We've all been told that, Connecticut's going to get rid of this stuff, right? So, while there is revenue for applying for licenses and getting into the lottery, we're hearing a bit about the cannabis business lottery and paying a lottery fee. The big revenue source is expected to be from the sale to the end user. So cannabis revenue is made up of both the Connecticut sales tax and an additional tax based on THC content. And it's important to note, this stuff's not going to be cheap, right? Because it's going to be the cost of the product plus the sales tax plus an additional tax plus a local municipal tax, which I'm going to talk in a minute. But the other thing is that when I think people think the money is going to go to the state, we think it's going to go into the general fund, right? Like that's the part of that funds our government and funds our state. So here's the breakdown of what the law says the money will go to. And I want to point out, if you build a new product, you need a new bureaucracy, right? You need regulation, you need people to monitor these things. So the first year, which is fiscal year 22, which remember, I think we're almost done with, 100% of the revenue is going to go to the Cannabis Regulatory and Investment Account. So that's the bureaucracy. So the 100% of the money in the first year. And then 100% of the money in the second year is going to go to the general fund. And then the money falls off of the general fund. So by fiscal year 29, no money is earmarked to go to the general fund. It's front loaded into the general fund. And then kicking in year 3, we see more money going into the Social Equity and Innovation Fund. It's actually a pot of money that's dedicated to building and promoting the cannabis business in those communities that have been adversely impacted by cannabis. And they've done that. They've looked at socioeconomics, they've looked at racial disparities, they've looked at crime patterns, and they've identified specific zip codes around our state that were considered to be adversely impacted. So that money is there to promote cannabis businesses in those communities. And then for those of us who are really interested in prevention, we have to wait till year 3 to get any money for prevention. And those of us who, believe the point of prevention is to get there before something happens, this is concerning. It's also the pot of money that is used for treatment and for data collection. So if we have a big demand for treatment, we may see even less money going to prevention. But in early versions of the bill, there was no money for prevention. So this was progress, but for many of us, it's really inadequate. State oversight. So who's watching this stuff? So the law specifically gives the Department of Consumer Protection, the DCP, a lot of responsibility. They are responsible for setting up all the regulations for packaging, warnings, rules, how the sales is going to happen. They have a big job here. They're also, and they're given like this two-pronged task. They're tasked with both protecting consumer health and safety and ensuring there's adequate supply to satisfy the market. So they've got this tension and this conflict between those two requirements. They're also tasked with making sure that there's enough marijuana for the medical marijuana market. So they're like serving a lot of bosses here. The law also creates a social equity council to oversee the social equity and innovation fund. And then they've already started making recommendations on things they'd like to change in this law. So we're starting to see kind of the impact of what we passed and what it means. Local control. So I know, you're working with both Durham and Middlefield. Towns are tasked with acting in the interest of the public health of residents. And municipalities can decide where cannabis can be consumed and whether to allow marijuana businesses. But there's a few buts here. This doesn't impact you, but municipalities with populations over 50,000, they have to designate a public place for consumption. So that's kind of an odd thing. And then even if you ban in any town, even if you ban marijuana sales and marijuana businesses in your town, if 10% or more of your municipality's electors submit a petition, they can force a town referendum on retail marijuana sales. So even if you're planning and zoning decides you don't want it, if 10% of your electors submit a petition, you have to put it on a referendum. I referenced earlier municipal tax. So towns that do allow retail sales can charge an additional 3% municipal tax. That's on top of the sales tax and on top of the potency tax. But there's limits on what you can do with it. So some people think like, oh, this is great. We'll pass this 3% and we'll have buckets of cash and we can put it wherever we want. But these are the things that that you can use the money for according to the law. And so I know Middlefield's said no, and Dina tells me Durham's still talking about it. But if these towns do decide in the future to allow retail sales, there's an opportunity for those of you who do work with young people in either the prevention, treatment, or YSB, JRB side of it to maybe request that money be earmarked for your work, because we're certain that these YSBs and JRBs are going to see more people, and obviously prevention is going to be much more challenging when we're trying to counter, big businesses with big marketing budgets. And I want to give you a little update. So as you probably know, the legislative session ended last week. It was a short session, so they worked quickly and they didn't cover, there's a lot they didn't get to, but there are some big things for us. So HB 5329, which is, you can see the name of that one on there. It actually passed last week. We were very excited about this one. It's awaiting the governor's signature to become a law. It limits how cannabis can be gifted, sold, or transferred. So I don't know if any of you heard about this cannabis bazaar in Hamden, where people were like making a donation at the door, which got them admission. And then once you got inside, you got free cannabis. So it closed that loophole. You can't give cannabis in exchange for a donation, and you can't make a donation for admission to get cannabis. You also can't give cannabis in a door prize, goodie bag, or swag bag, because a lot of those were popping up, like kind of these cannabis promotion events, and you might get a goodie bag. So that banned this. What we really liked about it was they really put restrictions on advertising, so close a lot of those loopholes. So illuminated or electronic billboards cannot advertise cannabis products between the hours of 6 a.m. and 11 p.m. So that was a huge one. So my Bridgeport billboard would have to go down. It puts the burden on the cannabis business to demonstrate that 90% of the audience is 21 or plus. It prohibits any cannabis plant imagery in advertising. It prohibits anyone other than medical marijuana sellers from using the word dispensary. Only businesses with a Connecticut cannabis license can advertise. So you'll no longer see that like 20 miles till your cannabis business in Massachusetts, or go to this website to find your nearest cannabis business. So those will be outlawed. It expanded the distance they have to be from 500 feet to 1,500 feet from an elementary or secondary school, house of worship, recreation center, childcare center, playground, park, or library. So it's given us a bigger buffer. One thing it does do that we weren't crazy about, in the current law, you would only be allowed to have one store or micro grower per 25,000 residents. So it was really stopping the density. That in the law was supposed to end in 2024. This current law will eliminate that. So you could see some cities in our state with some pretty dense cannabis businesses now, because they won't, prior to that, you could only have 4 in Bridgeport. So now you could end up with more in certain cities, more dense cannabis businesses. So that was the downside of this law. But I have to tell you, like, this law was written, the advertising restrictions were written by a legislator I work with, and he came to us. He's like, what do you want? What do you want in there? And we told him, and he put it in, and he got it passed. So it's a proof that, when you work with your legislator, sometimes they can get things passed that actually do what we want them to do. So we're very excited about this one. The next one that didn't get a vote is there was an act that was going to require, there was a bill that was going to require the Department of Consumer Protection to develop and distribute materials related to safe storage of opioids and cannabis, and then require retailers to distribute that, but that didn't get a vote. And then the last one that we were waiting to see what happened, which is on the next slide, is there was a bill that would have banned flavored vapes in Connecticut, and for the 3rd year in a row that did not pass, which leaves us in like this little island in the Northeast that we're one of the only states that hasn't passed a flavored vape ban. And the legislature got themselves in a little bit of a pickle, right? Because we know that flavors that appeal to kids that's what starts a kid on the path of using these products. And then at the same time, they're passing marijuana, which comes in like gummies and cookies and brownies. So they really did seem to have gotten themselves into kind of a quandary. But we're also concerned that what this means is that even though the federal government is taking some steps to limit nicotine vapes that coming in flavors, we know that marijuana is, those policies are being made state by state. So we're expecting to see flavored THC vapes in Connecticut retail outlets as soon as they're open. So it would have been nice to have seen those flavored vapes banned, because it would have applied to the THC vapes. So we're disappointed about that one, but maybe if we all start working with our legislators now, we can get that in the next session. So now John's going to talk to you about the harms of this product. So there you go.
Thanks, Melissa. Okay, so just a couple of brief review slides to start. So, marijuana can cause an increase in the risk of heart attack, especially with those patients with heart disease. It does contain a lot more carcinogenic hydrocarbons than tobacco smoke. And marijuana is significantly linked with mental illness, especially schizophrenia and psychosis, but also with depression and anxiety. And we're going to talk a little bit about that one as we go through this, because this is very significant, this link with mental health issues. I still once in a while get somebody saying, well, marijuana is not addictive. We've known it's been addictive for a long time. 1 in 6 kids, teens who try marijuana will become addicted to it, as opposed to just 1 in 10 adults. So it's much more addictive for that developing adolescent brain. And children and teens are 6 times likely to be in treatment for marijuana addiction than for all of the legal drugs combined. And this is not because marijuana is more addictive, it's just because so many more people are using it, right? It's much greater use. And if you take like US Census data and our Connecticut Youth Risk Behavior Survey, which measures how many Connecticut high school students are using marijuana, you just kind of crunch the numbers, you get about actually more than 10,000 high school students in Connecticut right now who are addicted to marijuana. And you start to see these research citations at the bottom here. Marijuana and pregnancy, this is important. So THC does cross the placenta, and if you're using marijuana during pregnancy, right, it does create problems with neurological development in the newborns once they're born, right? Especially motivation, learning, memory, and movement. THC exposure in utero compromises the brain function and IQ in young children. So we're seeing decreased IQ and brain function in kids who have been exposed to THC in utero. This is especially important because in some states like Colorado, they've been promoting cannabis as a morning sickness cure, right? So let's use cannabis to cure your morning sickness. And I think it does help with the nausea. In fact, we know it does. But obviously there are other things to help you with your nausea, and you've got to be thinking about these other, downsides, these real problems with using marijuana during pregnancy. So it really should not be used with pregnancy at all. So what does THC affect? Well, actually it affects several different parts of the brain, but the main thing, and I'm going to focus on, is the focus is on the hippocampus, which is the part of the brain that really focuses on being able to maintain attention, concentration, and memory, being able to recall things. And we can see from, over 25 years ago, research with college students showing that there was, negative impacts with cannabis. And we could see that research developed, and even 12 years ago, we see that the deficits in learning, verbal learning, it took 2 weeks after use before there was no difference with a comparison group, right? Deficits in verbal working memory, the ability to verbalize and kind of apply things that we've learned later, up to 3 weeks after use, before there was no difference with a comparison group. And deficits in attention were still present at 3 weeks. So some significant impacts on learning. Marijuana has some significant impacts on learning. And we see some of that. There was that now famous, for at least for us, Duke University study that demonstrated an up to 8-point IQ drop in teens who used marijuana 3 to 5 times a week. A couple really interesting things about this study is the fact that, number one, we're talking about 1980s and 90s potency marijuana. We're not talking about 2020 potency marijuana, so much weaker marijuana. And the other thing is that they saw this IQ drop, and then they retested these folks at about age 40, and they did not recover any of that IQ. Even if they stopped using marijuana in their 20s, they saw no recovery of that lost IQ. So it was a permanent IQ drop, lost forever. Individuals before the age of 17 who are daily users of cannabis, 60% less likely to complete high school or obtain a degree compared to those who never used marijuana. There was a longitudinal study of middle school students, right? If they followed them through high school, and they found that, alcohol use predicted greater academic unpreparedness and delinquency. Marijuana also, those two things, but also in addition, poor academic performance and mental health conditions. More frequent use of cannabis associated with lower grade point average, skipping more classes, less current enrollment, and being less likely to graduate on time. And there was an article today just about how school districts are really focusing on chronic absenteeism because of the pandemic. Well, marijuana actually exacerbates the problem. So some interesting information from accidental overdose. This is Connecticut data. You can see the resource at the citation at the bottom. But 33%, so a third of all accidental drug overdose deaths in 2020 and 2021, they also tested positive for marijuana, right? They didn't OD on marijuana, but they also tested positive for marijuana. And that'll be a really important thing to remember in a couple of slides. But when you look at hospitalization data from 2016 to 2019, admissions for marijuana intoxication among kids under 18 up almost 500%, right? This is hospitalizations for marijuana intoxication, up almost 500% between 2016 and 2019. For adults, up almost 400%, right? Those addicted to marijuana having a mental illness, up 200%. Marijuana users having a mental illness, up almost 30%. Marijuana abusers diagnosed with a psychotic disorder, up 300%, right? So we're really seeing these mental health issues really, and these hospitalization issues really being impacted by the kind of norming of marijuana use that's been going on. And I certainly expect these to get worse as we head into the legalization period, not only for youth, but for adults as well. And also the Connecticut Poison Control Center data here in Connecticut, the Connecticut Poison Control Center. And again, this is regarding children ingesting edible cannabis, right? So the Connecticut Poison Control Center saw an increase of calls from about 20 in 2017 to more than 100 4 years later in 2020, right? They expect the number of calls to double or triple based on what they've seen in other states now that we're legal. And again, this is children ingesting edible cannabis, right? Could be a 5-year-old or an 8-year-old who got a package of gummies that look like their snack, their school snack or something like that, or a cookie or a brownie, right? Energy bar, right? And poison control centers nationwide saw 6-fold increases, right, in cases of children ingesting edible cannabis, right, involving marijuana, right, from 500 in 2018 to over 3,000 just through August of 2021. This is really important. So use of every other drug among youth is going down, except for marijuana right now. This is from the CDC's Youth Risk Behavior Survey. And then they found that lifetime use of marijuana is the #1 risk factor for opioid misuse. Think about that. The #1 risk factor for opioid misuse is lifetime use of marijuana, right? So the link between marijuana and opioid misuse is very clear. 22% of high school students report using marijuana, right? So over more than 1 in 5. And now moving to some Colorado data, more than half of the Colorado high school students who use marijuana reported that they dab marijuana to get high. That's using these concentrates, which again, averaging maybe 40 or 50% THC, but up to 90, 99% THC. So this is what the kids are using often, and it's creating real problems for their brain development and their mental health. Surgeon General reported that the scientific evidence that heavy marijuana use can be detrimental to cognitive functioning and mental health, as we've been seeing already in some of my slides. About 1/3 of Colorado youth who use marijuana drove after using marijuana, up from just 9% in 2017. So a big significant increase in just a few years. Here we go. Colorado teen visits to the emergency department for marijuana, they increased post-legalization. And 71% of those visits were for psychiatric events, right? So we're seeing a real increase in teen visits to emergency departments for psychiatric events related to their marijuana use. Among youth who use weekly or daily, 33%, 1/3 of them are cannabis dependent. And this one study by SORTA found a 25% increase in cannabis use disorder amongst teens in legal states. And then this is just this nice kind of graphic kind of summary. It doesn't cover everything, but it covers a lot of this, right? It hurts the developing teen brain, lower grades and exam scores, less likely to enroll in college, less likely to graduate from high school or college, lower satisfaction with life, more likely to earn a lower income, more likely to be unemployed, right? That IQ drop, right? So this is a nice slide from the National Institute of Drug Abuse that I include for your use in the future if you'd like. All right, I am going to turn it back over to Melissa.
So talking a little bit about prevention, I mean, I know because you're ending your DFC this year that you're all very familiar with the SAMHSA's 7 strategies for community change, but we just wanted to recap some of the things that coalitions can be doing to prevent youth use in our communities. So a lot of us are disseminating information to build awareness around health risks, trends, local conditions. If you've got recent student data being revealed this year, that's a great opportunity to see what your kids are doing. I mean, I know we just did a survey and town I work in, and we discovered that 1 in 7 upper class high school students reported having driven after using marijuana, compared with, 1 out of 14 who had drank and drove. So we're seeing some alarming trends with our kids, and you'll have this opportunity to kind of use that data to engage your communities on the risks of this product. We have a lot of opportunity to build skills in our kids and our parents and our law enforcement and retailers and other stakeholder groups. Ensuring supports, a lot of us are concerned that there's adequate support out there for young people who may find themselves addicted to marijuana, and what's available to them to deal with that. Changing access. A lot of us have been doing retailer work with alcohol, but also safe storage work with opioids. So there's an opportunity to do safe storage messages with edibles. So we keep our alcohol in our liquor cabinets, but a lot of people keep their edibles in their bedside tables. And so there's some real opportunities to do access messaging. Consequences. So really looking at what your school policies are for alcohol and marijuana, looking at how you can recognize those retailers if you allow them, for not selling to kids. So changing how your enforcement looks, physical design. What does your signage look like? I've seen you've done some great signs about not having vapes and marijuana in your parks. We've actually, where I work, we've used your signs as a model. So keep up the good work. And then educating and informing on policies. There's a lot of opportunities around state laws and referrals and school policies to really engage as a coalition. It's not lobbying if they're not in session. So, and then you're all not going to be restricted by some of the DFC funding restrictions as well. So using our voices and using our knowledge to educate legislators about the impacts of these policies is really pivotal, because, with a 303-page law, there's a lot that our legislators don't know that they signed. And there's a lot that they don't know is how it is going to impact our communities. So doing that education around policies is really, really important right now. I think we're going to skip through this one just for the interest of time. Local level community advocacy. So I know it sounds like Durham is still discussing it. And so for those of you who are engaging on this process, there's some things to consider about allowing marijuana businesses in your towns. The Smart Approaches to Marijuana, SAM, has a great local toolkit. We have a link to it, I think, at the end, right, John? So you can see that. But things to consider, things you can, rules you can make locally. How close do you allow these businesses? Now we're saying 1,500 feet. That's the state law, so that's great, but you could make that bigger. You can put restrictions on signage, you can put restrictions on advertising, you can limit the hours of operations. You need to consider security. Cannabis remains a cash-only business. They can't use the federal banking system. So, what does that security look like? Traffic, we've heard a lot about traffic when the retailers opened in Massachusetts. How will you manage that? What about record keeping? If you're dealing with a product that has remnants, with a liquor store, you don't have to worry about the remnants of the liquor, right? Like it's sold in bottles, but when things are sold in plant matter, how do you manage the remnants of that? How do you make sure they're not walking out the back door? How do you make sure they're not running a black market operation? We know the black market thrives when cannabis is legalized. So how do you deal with odor? Some of these businesses emit, especially grows, emit quite a lot of odor. Google that. There is a whole range of products that businesses can buy to help with the odor that their businesses emit. And how do you want that? Where do you want that to be in your town? What businesses, where will it be in proximity to other kinds of businesses? Do you want the tutoring place next to the marijuana business, or do you want, your bagel restaurant next to the marijuana business? Like, you want to think about that. We talked about the impacts on utilities. Can our electrical grid handle some of these, especially indoor grows? Because we're talking about companies taking over empty warehouses or empty factories and putting indoor grows in. That's a huge drain on your electrical grid. And the environmental impact, which I referenced earlier, these if it's an outdoor grow and even an indoor grow, these products require a lot of water and they require a lot of pesticides. So how does that impact other aspects of the quality of life in your town? State level, we urge outreach to your legislators. We would like, we're talking to our legislators about those THC caps. Why are the pre-filled vapes excluded? How can we get better health warnings? How can we make sure that we don't give kids a message that marijuana is less serious than alcohol because the penalties are less serious than alcohol? How can we think about online sale, because that's not really addressed in the law? Of course, the drug driving and enforcement is a real piece. And then that funding for prevention, waiting to year 3 just doesn't feel like it gives us, like we're really going to be behind the game when we don't have the money for this. I mean, some of us have had these large federal grants. Other towns are trying to do prevention on $2,000 a year, with volunteers. So there's a real kind of inconsistency of prevention messaging and funding across the state. So advocating for more prevention dollars is really important.
And I'm just going to emphasize Melissa's point that because the session is over, actually any contact to your legislators right now is not considered lobbying, because there are no bills to lobby on, right? So if you tell them, look, you need to, advocate for, lower THC caps and make sure pre-filled vape cartridges are included in that, that's not lobbying. If I say that to my legislator today, that's not lobbying. So
the other piece is we're going into an election year. So this is, these legislators are going to be out in our communities. They're going to be campaigning. They're going to be wanting to talk to people. So this is a good time to ask them what they think about these and what plans they have, and engaging. I don't know if you have legislators at the table in your coalition. We have a legislator at our table, and it's really important to kind of reach out to both sides of the aisle too. You may find, some people are allies on some of your work and other people are allies on other parts of your work, but this is your chance to really get in front of people, because they're going to want to talk while they're campaigning. DCP, so we talked about how important their role is. They are given so much power, and one of it is they can change potency limits up or down, but they'll have to have they're in like the rules and regulations stage. And when they set these rules and regulations, they're going to have a public hearing. So those of us who do care about this subject really need to make sure our voices are heard. And here we've got some resources for families that we've identified. And then the next slide, we've got a lot of citations and other supports for coalition staff, because we really want you to be able to distribute this and use this in your work. I think our contact information is on the last slide, so we're available if you have questions, follow-up questions. Very likely this will look different. This presentation will look different in the fall when we get all the regulations set. So we'll try to update that as well. But I don't know if anyone has any questions.
yeah, we've got time for questions if people have them.
Yeah, I have questions or comments when I'm ready, when you're ready for me.
Yeah, go ahead, Laura.
Okay. So nice to meet you, Melissa. Thank you for all the work you've done. And John, so good to see you again.
Nice to see you, Laura.
So yeah, Durham had a public hearing for an ordinance through the Board of Selectmen, had very small attendance, but the attendance that we had, there were people actually urging us not to pass an ordinance banning it. There were some people who are, supportive of it, and with restrictions, of course. And then I had a few who were against. So I say at best it was a 50-50 split with the comments that the Board of Selectmen received. The Planning and Zoning Commission has drafted a set of regulations that they have opened up a public hearing. They had even less attendance at their meeting. And again, about 50-50 split between the commenters, pro and con. So we don't really know what that means for the town of Durham. And I'm wondering if we couldn't have, I know we can't lobby, but can I send you guys our draft regulations? And can maybe you review them to see if it does go that route, if we could add in some more protective measures in that regulation, in case, we do not ban. And then the other thing it is my understanding that the only way it goes to referendum is if there's that petition, right? The Board of Selectmen can't on its own accord bring it to referendum, because I do have some board members on both boards that wishes it would go to the people. But unless it's a petition, I don't think there's any other way to go to referendum.
Right.
Yeah, I guess it would depend on your, the restrictions and rules within your town as to who could bring a referendum and what, in what circumstance.
So
'Cause I think do you have a charter or something?
well, we do, and we are also, we also follow, the statutes in terms of elections. So it is my understanding that if I go to town meeting and I propose a ban of an ordinance banning it, I can't take that off the agenda and go straight to a referendum like other things that go to town meeting. Because of the wording in the law, in this law, it is so specific. That's what I'm understanding from my attorney.
And that's not a part of the law that I am as intimately familiar
Yeah.
with, but if that's what your town attorney is telling you, then I would trust them.
Yeah,
more than I would trust me.
yeah. But just so you know, for the people who are in favor of going straight to the people to decide this, they have to propose it.
I'm surprised. I mean, they seem to want to break down all the barriers to having these businesses when they wrote the law. So I'm actually surprised that they wouldn't let it go to referendum in the hopes that people would want it. I mean,
yeah. Well, it's
yeah.
a pretty low 10% of the electorate. Well, in Durham,
is it much? Right? Is it much? I mean, it's interesting because, we've already seen one round of changes to the marketing of the products. We haven't yet seen the rules and regulations issued by the Department of Consumer Protection. So there's still a lot of unknowns. So I know a lot of communities have passed kind of moratoriums on it and said, you know what, let's just sit tight and let's see how this plays out before we jump in. So, different towns are taking different tacks on it, but there's still a lot that's not been set yet by DCP. So a lot of us are waiting for that.
But would you be willing to review our regulations just to see if there's anything more we could suggest?
Yes.
Okay.
And I do,
Absolutely.
and I do also suggest if you look at the SAM toolkit, because that gives some really specific examples for municipalities, but I'll happily look at it as a non-lawyer.
Dina, can you arrange for that, please?
And Dina, if you don't have the toolkit, I have it. I can email it over to you. The SAM toolkit.
I have it somewhere, but
Okay.
it's in my computer of files for sure.
Got it.
The other thing that I want to point out is, this budget season, because the DFC grant is ending, we've had to put money in the budget to continue the work with a prevention coordinator. So this year, there have been some people who have suggested that perhaps we don't fund that. And I think we should remind people of that part of the law, Dina, that does give YSBs and JRBs a role in the marijuana enforcement arena. And so that's just one more way that the government recognizes this structure as being very important to prevention work.
Yeah. Yeah. Very important. I just had a comment that in the beginning, I think, John, you mentioned that picture where you could have alcohol and THC mixed. I can remember I don't know, maybe a couple years ago in a liquor store, that I saw CBD alcohol products. And I was like, well, that's going to transition real fast into THC alcohol products, just in the
Yes.
middle of the store for anybody.
Yeah.
Right.
Which would
I
be
think
interesting.
the other thing is the education piece. We've been talking about youth, but this opens up a lot of discussion with our senior citizens as well. You know, you have to kind of go the lifespan with THC. You know, we're having older adults trying gummies and trying edibles, and they don't understand how it might, you know, interfere with their medications, or mixing it with alcohol, like Dina's talking about, that you can exacerbate the effects of both alcohol and marijuana if you take them together.
Yeah.
So there's a lot of education that needs to happen around this product, because, you know, especially if you older adults, their brains, they're thinking marijuana of the 60s and 70s. They're thinking, you know, Woodstock marijuana, and what we've got now is edibles at 40% THC. So we have a lot of education to do.
Yeah. Yeah. I was also very surprised that you said that you didn't say Surgeon General's thing on, but like that, on a pack of cigarettes, there's a Surgeon General's warning. I can remember it might have been DARE or another program like second grade, where we had to write our own Surgeon General's warning for a pack of cigarettes. And that was real impactful. And now it's not going to be on marijuana. That's scary to me. There should be a warning on it.
It's a significant issue that, again, needs to be dealt with. And the only way to deal with it is at the legislative level.
Yeah.
100%.
Yeah. So, Kirsten had just mentioned, I don't know if she had to leave yet, but to pick up her kids, that she'd be interested in some more resources. I can send those too, and send her this PowerPoint, and then speakers as well, which is great. And thank you both so much.
Thank you.
Very informative for sure.
Nice to see everyone.
Yeah. The only thing that I have left on the agenda to bring up is community updates, if anybody had anything to share. And then I wanted to mention for sure that people knew, I'm going to put it in the chat box. It is National Prevention Week. And this was kind of our first official event for the week. And I'm going to put some other events that we're having in the chat box, if anybody wants to attend or share or register, however, which would be great. So I'll stick around until everybody's gone if anybody has more questions. Not many of us left, but thank you both so much for presenting, and
Thank
we'll
you.
see you all soon.
Thanks for having us. Have a good
Thanks.
All
summer.
right.
Yes,
Take care.
you too.
Nice seeing you again,
Summertime.
John.
Bye-bye. Yeah, good to see you too.
Yeah, thank you.